Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday the 29th of May, and you are watching episode 133 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Don't Carbonate the Great Artesian Basin, is my guest, MP Colin Boyce, member for Flynn. Colin was born and raised and educated in Toowoomba, but we won't hold that against him. He qualified as a boilermaker and worked for several years in the gas industry as a high-pressure pipe welder. Other employment included ringer, timber cutter, plant operator, earth-moving contractor, farmer and grazier. Colin is a rare breed of politician with real-life experience. He embarked on his political career in 2005 as a councillor for the Taroom Shire, which was abruptly ended in 2008 when the Shire was abolished as a result of the local government amalgamations. Colin re-entered the political fray in 2017 and was elected the member for the LNP stronghold of the state electorate of Callide. In 2022, he resigned as a member of Callide and successfully contested the federal electorate of Flynn for the National Party. Welcome, Colin.
Yeah, well, thank you, and good evening to the listeners.
Thank you. Before we start this discussion on Glencore's proposal and that, could you give us a bit of insight? I mean, you've had an interesting start in life in regards to compared to other politicians who seem to be just started off as a staffer or the unions or something like that and come out of university and sort of slotted in either as a lawyer or something in the political field. We don't seem to have that many more people from real life experience. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember the local doctor ran for parliament and the local policeman and things like that. But now we seem to have a core of professional politicians, and it's changed the nature of Parliament, I think. Besides, as well as can you give us a bit of background on your sort of misbehaviours as a youth and that?
Oh, look, well, just to make some comment, Bill, you are absolutely right. One of the things that I've noticed in my short political career is that Parliament is absolutely full to the brim with what I call career politicians, and they are wonderful people and they have the best intentions. And this is from all sides of politics and all political flavours. These people are highly educated. They've been to university and have all manner of degrees in law and accounting and journalism and so forth and so forth. They've gone on to become union hacks or political staffers or something associated with politics. The next thing you see is they've got their face on a corflute somewhere and for some political party. They then become the elected member. They spend a few years in politics, a couple of terms in politics, and the next thing they become the minister for a portfolio. They're in their late 30s or their early 40s, and the reality is that these people have never had a proper job in their life. They do not understand what it is like to actually run a business, to employ people, to sack people, to go to the banks and borrow millions and pay it off and make things work and deal with the day-to-day goings on that small business people have to negotiate in terms of political policy and the bureaucratic red tape that people face is the day-to-day things that we all face, and that's unfortunate. And we are in very short supply in our political arenas, whether they be state or federal, for people who have got genuine business experience, genuine life skills outside of politics. And I mean, we've all got life skills, but people who've been down the stony road of life, if you like, and seen things the way that average Australians would. So I would most definitely nominate that as a concern for me, because you don't see business people with an enormous amount of experience coming to politics, because it's just simply not worth it for them. In terms of me and my history, I grew up in central Queensland on a reasonably isolated brigalow block, but my father drew in the early 50s. I went to a small one-teacher school out in the middle of nowhere, and got my education. I then went on to boarding school, left boarding school and went out into the big Wild West as a ringer, a stockman. I travelled around the world on the backpacking trip around the world. Got married, had some children. I was a timber cutter, I was a fencer, I was a tractor driver, I was an earth moving contractor. I became a boiler maker. I started a small engineering business. I worked in the coal industry as an earth moving contractor. I worked in the gas industry as a high pressure pipeline welder. And in 2016, as luck would have it, or as fortune would have it, I became an accidental politician in terms of state politics, and spent about a term and a half in state politics, 2 elections, then came to federal politics, and I'm in my first term as a federal member for Flynn. I've been 2 years in the job, and here I am. But I do have a passionate understanding of what affects both the mining and resource sector and the agricultural sector in particular in my electorate of Flynn in central Queensland. It is a huge electorate. It's twice as big as Tasmania. It's one of the big economic engine rooms of Australia. We've got the Port of Gladstone, which is the capital, if you like. The coal terminal there is the 4th largest coal exporting terminal in the world. We've got Australia Cement there, which is the biggest cement kiln in Australia. We've got the CSG gas industry at Curtis Island, which is the largest liquefied gas terminal on the east coast of Australia. The Rio Tinto alumina sector there, which again is one of the real big alumina production businesses in Australia. Rio Tinto, obviously. We've got 3 coal-fired power stations, Gladstone, Callide and Stanwell. A huge agricultural sector that produces just about anything you can possibly think of in terms of food and fibre and agricultural production. We've got sugar, we've got cotton, we've got beef, we've got, chooks and eggs and any sort of grain produce you can think of. So we are a huge economic generator, and to represent a area in Australia like that, first of all, is an enormous responsibility, and it's an enormous honour, I might say, to have everybody put your faith in, put their faith in me to do that. It is a job that requires that you bat for the people that put you there. You bat for their interests, and sometimes that requires going against the grain of what is termed loosely as party politics. But you have to be an advocate. You have to understand the issues. And one of the anomalies about these big electorates, and particularly Flynn, for an example, if you want to make comparisons to a suburban metropolitan electorate, they've got issues like traffic congestion at the roundabout on the way down to Bunnings on Saturday morning. I've got a gas ship that's had a complete generator failure that's tied up to the dock at the terminal at Curtis Island, and under maritime law, they're not allowed to get rid of it. And there's issues around that because it's got ramifications on the whole gas supply industry, both for export and for the domestic market. I mean, that's just small comparisons, and these are some of the issues that I have to deal with that my colleagues from all flavours of politics don't understand, nor do they get to realise that.
I think the thing about Flynn too, with its economic side of it, it's basically has a bigger economy and GDP than Tasmania, pretty well, which isn't that hard anyway. But that's the sort of thing you're dealing with in some of these regional seats. That they are a major source of Australia's income. But they don't get the recognition in regards to exactly what they're outputting. The other thing I'm curious about is you were the member for Colin in the state politics, and now in the federal you're in Flynn, which covers the same area, but of course bigger. The system that gave you the opportunity. Was that sort of because you were known within the community and the branch and all those sort of things, so you had that personal experience with people to be known in the area, and and get the support of local branch members and things like that?
Look, I'm a little bit unique. I've represented my communities in all three levels of government, local government. So I was a local government councillor, pre-council amalgamations in Queensland in the early 2000s. I obviously went to state politics and now federal politics. So I've served in all three levels of government, which is not exceptional, but it's not the ordinary thing. For me, it was pretty much opportunity politics. I have been a member of the National Party ever since I was about 20. So I have been interested in politics all of my adult life, if you like. Only ever been the foot soldier until I came seriously to politics, and that was by chance, and that was, on the retirement of long-time sitting members, and at the time, I remember thinking to myself, well, now's the opportunity because you're not happy with what's been happening. So the old adage, if you want something done, do it yourself. So I nominated, and obviously the majority of the members saw fit to endorse me as their candidate. In the first state election in Callide, I only just won it. It was very, very close, and I think it took the Electoral Commission a couple of weeks to sort out who was the final winner. But I won it. I obviously spent I went through another election cycle, so I did a full term and then about half a term, and the federal seat of Flynn became vacant. Same reason, retirement of the federal member. And I always thought to myself, federal politics is for me rather than state politics. So I resigned my position as the state member for Callide, contested the federal seat of Flynn, and obviously once again the members thought I was doing a reasonable job, so they supported me, and I won that last federal election cycle, and here I am.
Okay, Colin, thanks for that. Just moving on to the topic of the night, Glencore's carbon and capture project. It planned to inject and store about, there's varying amounts, of course. Whoops, we've lost Colin. We'll just have to wait till Colin comes back.
Yeah, Bill, just have you got
No, I haven't got any. Here we go.
Colin's number?
He's
Oh,
coming
here
back.
he is.
You have to switch your microphone on, Colin.
Actually, there was a little bit of glitch before when we was setting up.
There he is. He's back again.
You can hear me?
Yeah, you're back. You
I don't know what happened then. I've got 4 bars here.
Yeah, we're back. Anyway, we'll edit this and we'll just move on to. I'll just start again. Just moving on to Glencore's carbon and capture scheme and plans to liquefy it and then inject and store about 330,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide and inject it into the Great Artesian Basin. I first sort of came across that on a landline program earlier on the year, and we had I think we had people from, I think it was Australian beef, choice beef, the Lee family. I think there was another family who ran pork down in the southwest there, and there, of course, there was a hydrologist talking as well. But that sort of kicked off. That would have probably been in about March or something like that, that story. And it's taken a while to try to hunt someone down, and fortunately I've managed to get you. It's a sort of a strange one because you've come in and you're obviously sitting in where you live, and that is cool because the Great Artesian Basin is so big. Like you say, it covers 22% of Australia's mainland. So there's a good chance someone's sitting on top of it anyway. But put you in a sort of unenviable position because it was a Morrison government sort of tick or the box that sort of allowed the project to go ahead. And we had back in 2020, we had Keith Pitt and Little Proud standing outside of the plant, sort of, hailing it as, part of the carbon revolution. And I think the government of the day even from a $35 million worth of grants towards it. So it's sort of, here comes you, the hierarchy of the Morrison government has sort of ticked the box for it. And of course, they left office just as you came in. And it sort of puts you in the position, well, I've got to stand up and sort of convince the people who had a hand in sort of promoting this project, have to convince them that it wasn't a real good idea and sort of start objecting to it. Did you find that difficult in regards to, getting an ear in regards to your colleagues about moving forward with this as an objection?
Well, the short answer to that is yes. But before I qualify that a little bit, or just for the benefit of the listeners, I'll just have to give you some history on the whole thing. So if you go back to my maiden speech in Queensland Parliament in 2017, I actually spoke about this issue, and it was the same company, Glencore, CTS and Co, that were proposing to do a similar project in a different location near a small community called Wandoan in central Queensland, where I come from. And I had known about it for quite a long time. Went to politics, obviously, on that particular issue. we had that issue stopped in 2018 because we identified a whole lot of anomalies. The fact that that precipice water aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin, where they proposed to pump all this hypercritical fluid, it was a potable water source. I actually have 3 precipice bores myself on my grazing properties that I own. At the time, I had Senator Matt Canavan, who was Resources Minister of the day back then. I had him at several meetings and so forth, and convinced him that it wasn't the right thing to do for a whole lot of range of reasons. Obviously, Glencore abandoned that project in late 2018. They then transferred the whole thing further south, some 200 kilometres south, down to a place called Mooney in the Western Darling Downs, and pretty much proposed to do exactly the same thing down there. So their original application to the federal EPBC office, so that's the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Office, was registered in the 9th of January 2022. It was signed off by the senior bureaucrat in the EPBC office on the 9th of February 2022, 1 month after the application. And it actually didn't cross the then minister's desk, which was Susan Ley. So the process, the bureaucratic process in respect to these things isn't as transparent as one might think it would be in defence of Susan Ley. The EPBC Act, which is an anomaly in the Act, affords absolutely no protections to the waters of the Great Artesian Basin unless it's got something to do with gas mining and coal mining. So in terms of Glencore's proposal to pump carbon dioxide as a hypercritical fluid down into the precipice sandstone water aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin, which is the deepest and the best water aquifer, under the Act, they actually weren't required to qualify, hydrology and geology and all of these things. And under the Act, a fellow named Andrew McNee, who was the senior bureaucrat, signed off on the project as not a controlled action, and that's the reality of what happened. So Glencore then, because they had that not a controlled action decision made by the federal EPBC office, then had to apply to the Queensland Environment Office because, as they have identified in their EIS statement, they will compromise the receiving groundwater, and they cannot meet the Queensland Government environmental protocols the way they stand, and they needed the environmental authority changed. So they made application to do that. This has happened over a period of years now until we arrive pretty much where we are now. And very recently, as a couple of weeks ago, the Queensland Environment Office issued their decision that they would not allow this project to go ahead because of various reasons, but without going into the complete gory details of the whole decision-making process, it was about compromising that water source, releasing heavy metals such as arsenic and lead into the water. The fact that the precipice sandstone water aquifer is not a confined water aquifer, and that's all highlighted in the Environment Office's decision. And for us, that's a huge win, particularly for agriculture, because you have to understand what the Great Artesian Basin is and how important it is. And most people have got no idea about it. The greater, wider public in Australia would be oblivious of the importance of the Great Artesian Basin. And very, very briefly, it covers about 1.7 million square kilometres of Australia. It is across 3 states and 1 territory, so Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia and the Northern Territory. It covers 71% of the area of Queensland. It is estimated to carry 65,000 cubic kilometres of fresh water. It is the world's largest underground potable water source. There is no other like it on the planet. So the big question is, given the fact that Glencore have said clearly in their EIS statement and their technical water reports, they will compromise that water and they cannot meet the environmental protocols, why on earth would anybody want to contemplate compromising and polluting a water source of such significance? It is just absolute madness. But then you have to understand what drives companies like Glencore. And this is not about getting rid of carbon dioxide per se. This is about creating hundreds of billions of dollars worth of carbon offsets, which they would take advantage of by having these projects proceed. And that is the reality of what was driving the whole thing in the first place.
So as the situation is now, are these sort of projects dead and buried in regards to the great areas of the Great Artesian Basin and other water aquifers? Is it now basically carved in stone that they cannot do it and no one else can do it, or is there other loopholes or other things that they may try to do in the future?
Look, it's not finished by any means. At the moment, I'll give you the score sheet if you like. At the moment, so we've had a win. We've won a battle. We've got the Queensland Environment Office to agree with us. At the moment, I have been part of negotiating a Senate inquiry into the whole issue, and that is happening as we speak. Through AgForce and other producer bodies, some high-profile agricultural producers. We have challenged through the federal court the Minister's office in respect to why the decision was made in the first place. We've had the first hearing in the federal court a couple of months ago. Those hearings are set down for further examination on the 1st and 2nd of August this year. So these decisions that have been made recently in respect to the Queensland Environment Office, they will have a bearing on both the Senate inquiry hearings and both the federal court hearings, I would imagine. I have some reliable information that the Queensland Government will be making some statements in the very near future in respect to that. So it remains to be seen what they actually come out with. In terms of what it was like to negotiate with the colleagues who probably weren't entirely in the picture, to be fair to them, about what this actually involved. It was somewhat difficult. It was not an easy operation to get both my colleagues in the National Party, the Liberal Party, all of the Teal people, to get them all to agree. So late last year, and in fact the last sitting of Parliament last year, I had some amendments moved to the EPBC Act to engage the water trigger in respect to carbon sequestration into the Great Artesian Basin. Those amendments were defeated by the Greens and by the government, which is quite appalling. So a little bit down the track from that episode, I've now got the Greens to recant and understand that they have made the wrong decision in not supporting me in those amendments, and now we have in terms of the Senate inquiry that is happening into the carbon sequestration into the Great Artesian Basin, we do have a position where we do have majority vote in the Senate, and that is important. So we've got all the Greens on side. We've got the independents, both Pocock and Lambie, and others, the Libs and the Nats, all supporting the Senate inquiry. But having said that, the Senate inquiry will hand down its report when they've finished their process, and then it's up to the government to either accept the report and do something about it, and put it on the business agenda and speak about it in Parliament or not. And that, I would suggest, is unlikely to happen. It will sit on the table until such time as everybody forgets about it. But it remains to be seen. Minister Plebisek, who is now the Environment Minister, she has been challenged by AgForce and a whole lot of supporters through the federal court system in respect to the decision-making process. That whole process is still in play, and those hearings will take place in 1st of August and 2nd of August, and it remains to be seen what the judge's decision will be, and the minister's response as to why and how this was all allowed to happen in the first place. So the whole issue is not over by any means. Big companies like Glencore, when they've got potential to make hundreds of billions of dollars in selling carbon offsets and sequestering carbon dioxide, don't walk away from these decisions lightly, I would suggest. And not that I know what their next move is, but I am preparing for that as best I can with the people that I deal with. And we'll have to wait and see. At the moment, since the Environment Office's decision, it's my understanding that they have 30 days to appeal that decision. Having said that, if you look at the Environment Office's decision, it is puts Glencore and CTSCo, their subsidiary company, in a difficult position in being able to counter the Environment Office's decision. And again, without going into the gory details of the decision, which was complicated, they would, I would suggest, have to come up with some significant findings to counter that decision. So we've won a battle, a huge battle, but we haven't won the war yet. There are things happening as we speak, as I say, and it remains to be seen what happens in coming months. But I will not stop until I've seen a moratorium put in place on injecting industrial waste into the Great Artesian Basin waters. I want to see the federal EPBC Act amended so that it puts some protections around this precious water resource that's so important to agricultural Australia.
I think one of the concerning things now is with this net zero is the focus on making monies out of an intangible, which is carbon credits, pieces of paper. It's not producing anything, but it does. The exchange of a piece of paper can reap you heaps of money, but it doesn't grow anything. It doesn't produce anything. But this is where a lot of focus on money making goes, not just by companies like Glencore in regards to selling the credits, but in all the investment areas, like the big traders like BlackRock and all those people, who get invested in all these renewable sort of things and carbon trading. It doesn't, like I say, it doesn't produce anything, but it costs us all an arm and a leg somewhere, because it doesn't matter who exchanges the money and where they get the money from. Somewhere along the line, it all has to come from the consumer or the taxpayer. And this is sort of alarming, but no one's really awake to it at the moment. Do you think we'll move to a situation where there will be more discussion in regards to the actual impact on individuals and our prosperity and our standard of living?
Oh, look, Bill, this is a complicated subject, and in my belief, you are right. The whole cost of living crisis is directly related to the whole net zero argument, and that in turn is related to the whole, global warming, carbon dioxide emissions argument, the Paris agreements, all of these worldwide phenomenon that is driving these arguments. And it's all about, as you rightly state, huge amounts of money that get transferred from one side of the ledger to the other to become so-called net zero emissions free. One of the things that really annoys me about all of the argument that gets put forward is people quite commonly use carbon credits or carbon pollution or carbon this or carbon that. It's got nothing to do with carbon. This is carbon dioxide we're talking about. And carbon dioxide and carbon are two completely different things. And carbon dioxide has been shortened to carbon mostly by the media and by reporters. And I make the mistake of using the same thing myself occasionally, but it just highlights the fact that the wider public is not educated enough to understand the ramifications of the whole issue about emissions, global warming, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, how that ties into the whole energy debate, things like the safeguard mechanism that's been instituted by the federal government in this term of parliament, and how that affects the consumer. So if I can just open that up a bit and explore it briefly, the safeguard mechanism requires that 215 of Australia's biggest companies lower their carbon emissions, or their carbon dioxide emissions, I should say, by 4.9% every year to meet the government's 43% emissions targets, which they signed up to in terms of the Paris Agreement. And the reality is that all of those big companies have identified all the same thing. Where are the carbon offsets coming from? Because we've done as much as we possibly can to lower our emissions by, putting scrubbers on our chimney stacks and cleaning up our act about the way we burn the fuel resources that we use, coal and gas and others. And so they get to a point where they've got nothing more to do physically in terms of their emissions. So they have to then buy carbon offsets to offset these emissions to become what they call carbon neutral. And the problem with carbon offsets is that there's just simply not enough available. So in terms of the Great Artesian Basin, we've now come up with a proposal to use the Great Artesian Basin as a liquefied carbon dioxide dump, industrial waste dump, whatever you want to call it. And that will in turn generate huge amounts of carbon offsets or emissions offsets. And that is the main driver behind these whole things. If you want to understand a little more how all of these policies affect the consumer, you've got the transport industry, for an example, that has to lower its emissions by 60% by 2030. And all of the big transport players, people like Toll and Linfox and those sorts of big trucking companies are all, putting better mufflers on their trucks and cleaning up their emissions out of their trucks and doing everything they can physically to lower their emissions. But it comes to a point where they can't do any more, so they have to buy carbon offsets or pay the tax, the emissions tax. And of course, what they do, because this costs them more money, is they pass that cost onto the consumer. So, for an example, a grocery store that gets a load of groceries that gets delivered in a refrigerated truck or on the back of a truck, whatever, it costs them more. It costs the supermarket owner more to get those groceries, and in turn, they put the cost of that onto those groceries, and ultimately a jar of Vegemite becomes more expensive. Everything that you buy in a grocery store becomes more expensive because the transport factor has become more expensive. So companies pass their costs on, is the point. And this happens across the whole spectrum of all of these big companies. The cement industry, the hardest to abate industry of all of the industries. They cannot meet 4.9% carbon emissions targets set by the government. They have to make allowances for that. As a net result, it's costing them a lot of money. It's projected that the price of concrete will increase by 50%. So therefore, if you want to build a new house, the concrete slab becomes more expensive. The concrete that holds the bricks together, it's more expensive. As a net result, an existing house is more expensive because it's all relative. And this is what is driving up the cost of building homes. You see all of these big infrastructure projects, building bridges and roads and hospitals and schools and so forth. All of the input costs are increasing in price. Concrete and steel and the building products that we need, they're all becoming more expensive. And it is all related to how net zero, the whole net zero argument has been applied to the economy. And that is the reality of it. I predict that cost of living for everybody will continue to rise the further down this road we go.
The thing is, when do we hit the brick wall? And either the people say, well, we've had enough, we can't afford these price rises and we're getting poorer, and try to do something at the ballot box, or do you see maybe some sort of curtailing of the ambitions of these zealots in the long run, or out of necessity?
Oh, look, this affects the whole energy system as well. Unfortunately, you will not change the minds of the wider public in metropolitan Australia until the lights go out. That's how it's becoming at the moment. It's a case of let Rome burn for a while, and the only way that you will make people realise what a fiasco the whole energy system is in Australia it has to come down to practical terms where you simply can't supply the energy, and that's where we're headed. Once again, that is this whole mad rush to supply renewable energy, to have an 82% renewable energy target by 2030. And if you start getting again into the detail of that and what are some of the things that are proposed, it is just absolutely insane that we are doing this. We've seen recently the big coal-fired power stations be given a new lease of life in New South Wales because everybody suddenly realised if they shut those facility down, the lights will go out because the renewable sector just simply cannot afford, it cannot supply reliable energy. It's that simple. Solar panels don't work when the sun goes down. Wind turbines don't work when the wind doesn't blow. But that doesn't stop our need for energy. And if you've got big industrial enterprises such as the alumina industry, they require 24/7 power. You cannot turn those things off. If you can't supply reliable power, you don't have those industries. It's that simple. And people have got to start understanding that. Unfortunately, they don't well enough.
I don't think we're going to wake up until actually the grid collapses or something, because the zealots are in charge at the moment. But it was interesting on Friday night in the early hours of the morning, and Saturday in the early hours morning, we actually had a bit of a wind drought, and overnight the wind output dropped somewhere down to 3 to 5% of the total grid, and we had to sort of make a bit of a hurry to get things back on track with it, firing up a few gas stations. But this theory that somewhere the wind's always blowing, it's not necessarily true, because we do have times, especially in Australia, and it's summertime, usually we can get a huge weather pattern over the whole of Australia with very, very large distance between isobars, so there's not much wind. So we can have periods of 72 hours without the wind blowing, and of course we don't have sun shining at night as well. So there is always the possibility that the lights will go out, and is that what it's going to take to sort of have a rethink? And that'd be pretty sad if we're prepared, or the people in charge are prepared to go all that way, and say, well, we're going to push on regardless, and until such time they do hit the wall.
Look, yes, you are right, Bill. And the reality is that the weather systems in Australia, we have high pressure systems that sit over central Australia for weeks and weeks at a time, and they just literally don't move. I was a ringer out in the big Wild West in my time when I was a young man, and you see that quite clearly with the big windmills pumping the water out of the bores. In wintertime, they're all pumping too much water because the wind blows a bit, but in summertime, when the big high pressure systems sit over there, they go without. And when you finish the mustering season, they're all looking for the bore runners to run around and start all the pump jacks and all the engines to pump the water, because the wind doesn't blow. And if you transfer that into producing electricity, it's the same principle. We've done up data on a wind farm recently, a wind factory, I should call it. They're not farms, they're factories. Mount Emerald, up west of Cairns. And last financial year, Mount Emerald wind factory produced 18.1% of power compared to its installed capacity. Right, so basically it's operating at less than 20% of its installed capacity, which is just crazy. I mean, this idea that they produce power all the time is just simply not true.
I think it also beggars belief. Since we started the Industrial Revolution, one of the key drivers for advancement is improving efficiency. And we've tried to strive for that all the way through. And now suddenly we've decided that we will forego the idea of being efficient, having some efficient model, to introducing inefficiency into one of the most important things that's ever been invented, in my opinion, and that's the grid. I mean, the grid has basically given people, especially in the Western world, their prosperity, because it's farmed out electricity right to your doorstep, to your garage, to factories and that. And that's provided us with the opportunity to basically invent everything we've got today. So it beggars belief that we can be convinced, or the powers that be can be convinced to put an inefficient model to drive the grid.
Well, that's right, and you're absolutely right, Bill. Since the Industrial Revolution and the advent of reliable, affordable energy, that is what has increased the standard of living across the Western world in the last 150 years. It's given us better health outcomes. It's given us better education outcomes. It's given us prosperity and a better standard of living across the board. And again, if we're going to take that away and replace it with something that is just economically unviable, how do we maintain that standard of living that we all have in what is generally and loosely known as the Western world? You've got proposals now to have hydrogen as an alternate energy source and produce hydrogen. Well, the first things you need to do if you want to go down that road is A, have a reliable energy source. B, you need a reliable water source to make the hydrogen out of. And C, you need the business structures, the demand to buy the hydrogen. And at the moment, we've got none of them. Up in Gladstone, there was, in my electorate, there was a presentation given recently by the Ports Corporation up there, which is a government-owned corporation, Queensland Government-owned corporation. They are suggesting that a 4 million tonne hydrogen production, industrial hydrogen production at Gladstone will require 110 gigawatts of renewable energy. So for the listeners' benefit,
that's more than twice the national grid.
Correct. So that is approximately double the entire generating capacity of the entire Australian grid as it stands now. The last information I have on Australia's energy production capacity is about 57 gigawatts. So they're proposing to build 10,000 wind turbines, 2,500 square kilometres of solar panels, and they require 45,000 megalitres of fresh water every year.
So you got to sell them your farm. You got to sell them your farm.
So this is Bill. This is the whole point, and this is the insanity of some of these proposals that get put up there by these people who are paid lots and lots of money to promote these things and sell them to the greater and wider public. It is just insane. Up and down the Queensland Great Dividing Range at the moment, as it stands now, we're aware of about 3,250 wind turbines that are either been approved or in various stages of approval. So, and that's just for the 82% renewable energy target. If you're going to have the hydrogen thing, you need to treble that, and that's in the greater Gladstone, Rockhampton area in central Queensland, just to power this proposed 4 million tonnes of industrial hydrogen. To add insult to injury, not only is the government proposing to subsidise the energy that goes to this hydrogen hub, they want to subsidise the water as well. And then they're also proposing to give a $2 a kilo tax incentive to anybody who produces hydrogen. Well, the last seminar I went to on hydrogen, you need to get hydrogen down to $2 a kilo to make it economically viable. That's the cost of production. So if it does get down to $2 a kilo cost of production through subsidies of energy and water, are we now going to give them a $2 a kilo tax benefit? I mean, this is basically writing the check out for these multi-billion-dollar companies, and it's going to cost them very little. I mean, it's just a ridiculous notion.
But it'll leave leave us as taxpayers and a nation broke. But the other thing is, you know, the amount of coal we've got is a strategic resource. It's been fueling our development for 100 years. Now we're going to a situation that we're not only giving up our energy security, we're actually giving up our national security, because if we continue to go down this track, every part of the renewables industry is dependent on a overseas supply chain. And part of that supply chain also comes from people who are hostile to us. That's placing the nation in grave peril in the long run in regards to our national security. The other thing is the wind turbines and the solar panels have got to be replaced at least every 20 years. The batteries about every 10 years. So we've got to turn over this massive capital cost within, say, 20 years, give them 20 years. But we've got to keep doing it every 20 years. There's no way we can sustain that as a nation.
Absolutely, Bill. And the point to all of these arguments is to claim that these industries are renewable is just a fallacy. They are not renewable at all. And as you've just pointed out, these industrial installations will have to be replaced every 20 odd years or thereabouts. They do not take into account the sunk capital that is invested in building these things in the first place. All they look at is, the cost gen report and so forth is what it costs them to produce energy when they're operational. It does not take into account the billions of dollars of sunk capital that is put into building these things in the first place. So it's not giving a true reflection of the real cost of all of this mad rush to renewables. Once again, what we're doing is promoting something that is unreliable.
But the thing is, what beggars believe is the people who are in charge, and over to you, Blue, you're part of the people who are in charge. Where are their brains? Because most laymen really, if you break it down into sort of simple terms, can figure out we've got to go broke in the medium term. But that doesn't seem to change the view of the people who are driving this. Are they sort of so blinkered that?
Yeah, well, look, again, I don't know what it is that drives them politically to advocate for these things. I, with a small bunch of colleagues, are very well, we argue against all this because it's a ridiculous notion that was going to cost future generations their livelihoods if we can continue to go down this road. Australia has huge resources of absolutely anything you can think of in terms of coal and the coal industry. We have for many, many years had very reliable, cheap power. In fact, we had the cheapest power in the world at one point in time. But now we've got the most expensive power. And you've got countries like China, for an example, who are buying Australian coal and building and completing something like 2 coal-fired power stations every week in China. And they are not signatories to emissions targets or Paris agreements or, climate change agreements and all of these issues that we all are. And the notion that Australia produces 1% of world emissions and we're going to reduce that by 43% and become net zero by 2050 and save the planet is just, it's ridiculous, particularly when you've got countries like Indonesia and India and China who are responsible for 45% of world emissions who are doing absolutely nothing.
And don't intend to.
Correct.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I always remember Terry McCrann's comment is signing up to the Paris Agreement and net zero was basically a suicide pact by Western nations economically. And it seems that we intend to take that road, and regardless of the fact that China and Russia and India and that sitting there, and they must just be laughing at us like we're destroying our economies. We're destroying our standard of living over this for something that's like I say, is carbon dioxide is a critical part of life. We can't survive without it. And my hypothesis is that human activity to generate anthropogenic CO2 has probably saved us from the next mass extinction, because as we went from, we now are in an ice age, the first ice age for 225 million years, according to Ian Plumer. And each time we go into a glacial period, we get CO2 down to 180 parts per million. Now, 180 parts per million isn't far off 150 parts per million, which plants will struggle to survive. So maybe we're going to go back into another glacial period in the next few thousand years. Maybe it's our action now was probably saving us from that dire straits of dropping to 150 somewhere along the line. But what do you think it would take to get people over this irrational fear of carbon dioxide?
Well, that's $1 million question, Bill. And I mean, I've been part of a group of influential people, the Saltbush Club, we call ourselves, and we are trying to get the facts out there as best we can. But we are fighting a global organisation with billions and billions of dollars of finance capital behind it, and it is an ongoing struggle. But I think in general, there are more and more people starting to realise the fallacy of the whole argument, if you like. The whole carbon dioxide argument has never been scientifically proved, as you pointed out. Ian Plumer is a friend of mine who you spoke of. He has been a wonderful advocate for the science to be revealed behind the whole global warming, carbon dioxide argument in general, as are others around the world. And it's something that is very complicated to explain to ordinary people who are busy in their own lives, who aren't particularly interested. They have got to form an interest in the whole thing before you can start to get through to them. If I said to the listeners here tonight, how much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere? I mean, there's the question. How much carbon dioxide is in the room full of air that you're sitting in right now? And the answer to that is not very much. In fact, it is 0.04% of the atmosphere. So it is 0.04% of the atmosphere. The atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.9% of argon, and the other 0.1% of the atmosphere is made up of a whole lot of trace gases, all sorts of gases, and one of them is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is actually 0.04% or thereabouts. 0.01% of 1% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. If you start going into the science of the whole argument, you start getting into things like Boyle's law and thermodynamics, which is really complicated science. You will start to realise that the whole argument that surrounds carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas can't possibly be correct. But as I say, it's too long and complicated to get into now. But join the Saltbush Club and get on their email list. And
I will. The other thing is too, a lot of people don't realise that water vapour is a major greenhouse gas.
Absolutely, and it is
more prevalent. Or carbon dioxide.
Correct. Absolutely right. Water vapour is something that they don't take into account. The oceans, what is it? 5/8 of the surface of the Earth is covered by ocean. The ocean has a huge effect on our weather patterns. It absorbs carbon dioxide, it expels carbon dioxide, all got to do with temperature and so forth. Our celestial orbit around the sun has all got to do with it. Where the big planets are in relation to the Earth has got to do with it. Our climate is changing. There is no doubt about that. Nobody is suggesting for 1 minute that climate isn't changing. The big question is it because of carbon dioxide? I would argue no. Not from the science that I've seen, not from the arguments that I've heard. So everything changes. Climate on planet Earth has been changing ever since the day the Earth began. As Ian Plimer puts it, 27 billion years ago on Thursday afternoon. And it will continue to change. And it has always changed, and there's absolutely nothing that man can do to change the fact that climates change. Now, we have to be mindful of the way we create pollution and the way we affect the Earth in all manner of ways. And I'm not advocating for 1 moment that we don't do that and be aware of that. But we have to put it all into perspective. And the reality is that we live on this planet, and we have to be mindful and we have to be sustainable about the way we go about things. We have to understand things more so than what we do. For me, the biggest threat to the Earth is not climate change, nor is it carbon dioxide or emissions. It's population growth. And the way the world's population is expanding, how does the planet provide enough resources to cater for that population growth? How do we come up with enough food and agriculture and fresh water and energy and medicine and education and all manner of things? And population growth is one of the biggest single issues that the world faces into the future. A little bit like a mouse plague, if you've ever seen a mouse plague.
Well, there is hope. I mean, one of the things for Western society, as we've got richer and with medical advances and becoming more materialistic and self-obsessed, our fertility rate has dropped off dramatically. Just about every Western country, it's not even replacing its own population at the moment. It's most places dependent on immigration. So you look at Japan. I mean, they've got 125 million people now. By 2050, they'll be down to about 110 million. By the turn of the century, they will be down towards 80 million people. So all is not lost. And for those other poor countries, what we've got to do is give them cheap electricity and TVs. And that will distract them from baby making.
So in terms of population growth, where you see the big population growth figures are in the third world countries in Asia and Africa and South America and some of these third world countries. And the way that you stem that is to give them a better standard of living. And if you want to increase their standard of living, they have to be provided with clean water and a health system and reliable and affordable energy. That is the way.
Cheap electricity.
Yeah, correct. Reliable and affordable energy, as I say, cheap electricity. So
We're just frozen at the moment.
can you? Yeah, you still there?
I thought Canberra would have better internet connection. You dropped out.
Well, I've got all my bars here.
Actually,
To
Bill,
me.
that was you that froze.
No, you're gone again.
Am I? Oh, well, I'm still
No,
here.
I'm picking up Colin fine.
Okay.
But you can continue, Bill. We can hear you.
Okay then. Look, we've gone over the hour, so we might just wrap it up.
No, that's fine. It's great to talk to you, Bill, and for the listeners, it's an ongoing issue for me. We started off on the Great Artesian Basin, rather, and as I say, we've had a win. We've won a battle, but we haven't won the war yet. It's still ongoing, and for me, I have been fighting this issue now for many years, and will continue to do so until I see it come to a conclusion that's satisfactory.
Okay then. Look, if you just stay on the line for a minute, I'll introduce next week's show.
Righto.
If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I'll be introducing Chris Scale. Now, Chris Scale is a very competent exterminator of feral animals of all descriptions. And as we go forward, as the government buys up more land for putting into protected states reserves and forest reserves and other protected land, we can just imagine that they are not going to spend the money managing and look after those lands. So we can quite expect a lot of that land that comes under these schemes will be full of noxious weeds and feral animals. So we'll talk about the actions that will be required as we move forward to control pests on government and public land. So join me next Wednesday. Thanks very much.